You spent $5,000 for an immersion in Bali. Maybe you did 10-day meditation retreats. Maybe you even considered doing psychedelic experiences to figure out what's truly going on in your belief system. And in these experiences, you may have felt an emotional high, but when you returned home a few weeks later, life still felt exactly the same. Today, we're going to talk about why that happens and how you can actually build a system for inner work that actually sticks. So, if you've ever done inner work that didn't stick, right, where you felt the emotional high, but you came back to your own life and a few months later you were just back at the same place, I'm going to explain to you exactly why that happens. Actually, today, we're not just going to cover that, we're going to cover why most inner work fails analytical men, the four-field schema I use with my clients, I call trigger mapping, and the exact assignment I give to every client in week one. And the thing to pay attention to here is how intense the experience felt or how expensive the experience was doesn't actually matter. The four field schema makes everything measurable, predictable, and durable. So as a result, the work that you do sticks, right? And this is foundational. If you skip this and you jump to advanced shadow work concepts or rewiring beliefs, then it's almost like you're trying to skip the basic lifts at the gym, like the bench press, the squat, all of that, and you're doing accessory exercises. So let's get into it. Part one, why most inner work doesn't stick. And this is an architecture problem. The thing is, retreats and immersive experiences actually work. You feel something real when you're in that container. However, there's no clear follow through. And if anything, assuming the facilitator is good, which is not always the case, it's like they give you the fish, they give you the transformation without teaching you how to fish for yourself, right? They give you the experience, but they don't show you how you can continue this transformation when you go back home. So what happens is when you're back a few weeks later, your boss sends you a very direct message about your work, or your girlfriend doesn't respond to a text you sent for a few hours, or maybe you see a peer get promoted before you actually get promoted. And that still activates the same triggers that you felt like you went beyond in the retreat a few weeks ago. And that happens because in that container, everything was working, but now you're back to day life. And the way I want to talk about this with you is let me ask you a question, right? A lot of you guys who are watching this are people who are good at problem solving. So think about it this way. If you're an engineer and someone asks you, hey, my code isn't running properly, how do I fix it? What do? You open the code base, you look at the architecture, you check the specific function to identify what's the problem. Or if you're an accountant and someone asks you, hey, how do I cut expenses for my company? What do? You don't just pull out a magic strategy from somewhere, right? You look at the profit and loss sheet and see where are we overspending and how can we cut that, right? Or if you run marketing and someone asks you, hey, we're running some ads, how can we improve our campaigns? You don't hopefully write some copy you've never tasted before. You start at looking at where people are falling off in the campaigns. So to create predictable progress in any area of life, first we need to look at data. So in data-driven actualization, we apply the same principle to the mind because you can't change a pattern you don't clearly see. And unfortunately, a lot of transformative experiences give you an emotional high without giving you a map so that you can replicate that change in your own life. But today we're going to fix that because I'm going to give you the four-step field schema that I use with my clients, which walks you through the full architecture. But before we do that, let's first have the right definition around what is a trigger, because this is commonly misunderstood in society. A trigger is any situation that reliably activates your threat processor. Your threat processor is one of the three systems you spend your time in. I made a separate video on this on the channel. You can check that out if you want. But it's basically the part of you that's scanning for things that could go wrong and that makes you feel on edge, right? But most people don't experience their triggers in this way. They just think, oh, I feel a bit off today. I don't know what it is. Oh, I don't know. I'm just an anxious person. But a lot of the time, feelings don't arrive randomly. Specific situations, relationship dynamics, tones of voice, or environments trigger certain experiences. So feelings can be mapped as an input output pair, almost like a function if we pay enough attention. So if we can make the input visible, which is the outside trigger, then we can do something about our own experience. And this is where, we can make the invisible stuff, our own experience, more visible. And with enough precision later, and we'll cover this in other videos, or you might see me covering this as well, we can identify what kind of faulty pattern we're falling into, like an interjection, a projection, a split ego state, and we rewire it with the right modality that fits. But we're going to do that later because none of that works without you logging your own triggers. So let's see how that looks like. Part 3, the 4-field schema. This is the exact process to map your own triggers. First field is the situation. Now, when I say the situation, this is exactly what happened, right? Factual, no interpretation. If I were to look at your life, I could verify it. So, for example, here's a distinction between a situation or a story. The situation might be, I sent a message at 9 a.m. I can look at your phone and see that. I didn't get a response by 1 p.m. Again, I can verify this, right? However, already a story might be, she's ignoring me, she's pulling away, I'm coming off as needy, that's not good. So again, with situation, we look at the observable facts. The second field is the emotional charge. From 1 to 10, how intense was the charge for you? And most entries will land between 4 to 7. That's normal. We're not looking for highs here, right? We're just looking for honest data. And when we do that, what this allows us to experience is, if you're consistent with it, then you can see how your triggers reduce in numbers over time, which is very powerful to see with your own eyes. Oh, my inner work is making a difference. The third field is the story. This is where you really pay attention to what kind of prediction mechanism your mind's using to turn this experience into a trigger for you. What did your mind tell you this experience meant? So going back to the example, this would be, oh, she's ignoring me because I came off as needy. Or maybe you see a peer getting promoted and the story is, I'm falling behind, I should be further ahead, right? And when you're doing this exercise, if you feel a little bit embarrassed about what triggers you, that's completely fine. If anything, that's a sign that you're being honest with yourself. Don't do this to manage your own expectations of yourself or other people's expectations of you, and you can keep it private, no issues. The last field, and this is where the change really happens, is what I call the good friend frame. So what would you say to a friend you genuinely respect and care about if he or she came to you with the same situation and the same story? And very important, do not change this question. This is not a reframe. This is not an affirmation. This is not what would you tell yourself. Imagine the friend in front of you and look at what you would tell them. So I actually had a client who tried this schema recently at a workplace situation. One of the coworkers was kind of messing around with him for having a professional tone at his work. And the coworker was like, oh, Dylan, do you always have to pull out this professional tone? And at first he was a little bit annoyed. He's like, I don't even realize I'm doing that. I'm just trying to be professional and do good work, right? But when he brought in the good friend frame, he realized, I can actually see the humor in this. And that allowed him to be humorous with the other person and say, yeah, I am so professional right now. And instead of getting triggered from the same experience, he was able to use it as a bonding moment with a coworker that before he was having friction with, right? So since this can be a little bit vague, let's walk through a couple of examples together. First, going back to the original situation we've been touching on this video, the situation is, okay, A client that I had, and this is how I came up with this story. A client I had sent a text to his girlfriend at 9 a.m. This client's an engineer in his 30s, so usually as he's getting into work, he texts his girlfriend, right? And she did not respond until 1 p.m. And usually they message every hour. The emotional charge was a 7 out of 10. He checked his phone 11 times because it was on Do Not Disturb, so he wanted to see, did she respond? Did she respond? Did she respond? And as a result of this, he actually had trouble focusing on a work meeting. The story he was telling himself was, she's pulling away. I've been too clingy. I'm losing her, just like my last relationship, right? So look at how intense the story is from just one experience, how much gold there is to discover if we take this as data to rewire our own belief system. First, it's she's pulling away, a prediction about the relationship. Then, I've been too clingy, self-judgment. I'm judging myself here. I'm losing her. Again, another prediction. Just like my last relationship, looking at the past and bringing that to the current situation, which can be useful at times, but it can also be very damaging. Then he used a good friend frame on this exercise and he realized, well, my girlfriend is also a professional at her work. She's probably busy. And me spiraling over this is only going to make it worse. So I understand, if this was a friend, I would understand his fear considering what happened in the previous relationship. And I'm here for you if you need to chat. So he was able to meet himself with acceptance, but also not get caught up in the pattern. And as he kept practicing this without anything else, right, without trying to change what he's doing, in 4 weeks, the charge dropped from a 7 out of 10 to a 3 out of 10 in this specific situation. The second example, again, I don't know why texting is coming up a lot in this video, but those were the examples I was able to find in our community. We had another client, Mr. R, who's a software engineer working remotely at a different time zone, right? And he didn't hear from his founders one day for a long time when he was asking a question. So immediately the story was, did I do something wrong? Is this arrangement maybe not working out? But when he brought in the good friend frame, he said, oh, they're probably busy with something. And the reality turned out to be that the founders took a cross-country flight. So for 6 hours, they're flying from LA to New York, and they just didn't have internet to respond to him. So again, this can be an extremely helpful exercise without even doing anything else and bring more predictability into your inner work. And if you think, you know what, I actually really resonate with this predictable path to doing inner work, then there's a couple of places I recommend checking out. First, we have the free resource that I made for you called the Calm Protocol. It's a 7-day playbook to get your nervous system into a state where trigger mapping becomes effortless. Because if you're stuck in that chronic thread mode all day, you're not even going to have the mindfulness to recognize triggers as they fire. So check that out. And if you want to understand the deeper system trigger mapping sits in, check out the RDT loop video, which walks you through our daily system that takes 20 minutes for you to turn your mind into your biggest asset instead of potentially a liability. So part 5, I want to talk about common mistakes that analytical men make around this, and this is really important. First, do not try to fix anything. I know it's so simple, and I know you maybe want to jump ahead. You don't want to be a victim to this pattern anymore. But don't do it, right? Don't try to find the root cause. Don't try to use a CBT tool on it. For at least the first month, just log. Just gather data. I'm going to teach you how to do the rewiring later, and it actually works better when you have a rich data set to work from. Mistake number 2, don't add extra fields or questions. You might be thinking to yourself, yeah, this is really good, but I want to add a field around what my ideal self would do, a field around what I feel in my body. Don't do this. I've tested this schema on hundreds of analytical men from companies like Blizzard, Intel, Google, Deloitte, Meta, people like you, right? And this is the 4 questions I came up with. The less questions you have, the easier it is to stay consistent. And these questions give you enough context to work with. So this is the balance I found. And mistake number 3, don't skip triggers because they might seem tiny to other people. Maybe your roommate left a dish in the sink. The barista was called to you. Don't tell yourself, that's just so small to write down. I'm a little bit embarrassed. Write it down anyway, because usually those small triggers actually give you some of the biggest breakthroughs that you might experience in life. Lastly, let's talk about how you can install the trigger mapping into your life. The simplest way to do this is this video is launched on Sunday. Obviously, if you're watching another day, that's fine. Within this week, I want you to have 3 entries of the trigger log with 4 fields in each entry. The key is you want to capture these entries as close to real time as possible. If you delay too long, you lose the richness that you have in the story. And at the start, keep them private. If you want, you can email me and share them with me, obviously, so I can give you some feedback. But don't force yourself into trying to write an insightful entry for someone else to see, because that kills the honesty of this practice. And again, don't try to do more. 3 is good enough to have meaningful data, but sticky enough so you can come back to this as a habit over life. And again, the trigger mapping is only the starting point of our whole process that I call the RDT loop: regulate, debug, and track. And the thing is, you can't rewire a pattern that you don't see. So the RDT loop gives you a way to rewire your nervous system, so you have the mindfulness to catch these loops, and also clear tracking, so you see how these beliefs also affect other habits in your life. So just a quick recap for what we covered today. First, the reason inner work doesn't stick is when it's not mapped to predictable patterns. Retreats or ceremonies become powerful experiences, but without architecture of how to bring it into your own life, they just fade. Second, trigger mapping has logs that you track in your life, and every log has 4 fields. 1, the situation; 2, the emotional charge from 1 to 10; 3, the story; and 4, the good friend frame. And 3, to install this in your own life, you just do this practice with 3 entries this week. Again, don't try to fix anything, just gather the data. And if you end up trying this, drop a comment and tell me which entry was the most difficult for you to write. Again, if that's difficult for you to share publicly, feel free to email me as well. In the next episode of this series, because this is a series I'm going to build out, I'm going to show you the tool that we use inside our data-driven actualization programs that we call Actualize OS, which is a combination of an assistant as well as a dashboard that shows you how your inner work actually translates to life. But first, I want you to start with the manual practice, because that builds your foundations. Thanks for watching. I hope this serves you in your journey, and I will see you in the next video.